Welcome into the Toronto Sports Rush here on the Bet Rivers Network. EJ Hradek joined today by Jamie McLennan, who you can hear on Overdrive on TSN Radio, along with Brian Hayes and Jeff O'Neill. And these guys, they light it up every afternoon on Overdrive. It's a great listen. So I'm sure that everybody's very familiar with Jamie. And Jamie, we have to. I mean, there's been so much attention around Toronto Maple Leafs in the last, several weeks, and certainly things have ratcheted up in the last 10 days or so. Let's just start with the coaching situation with Craig Berube. I was not surprised that John Shaika decided to make a move, just because it didn't seem like a fit to me with what Berube was as a coach and what Shaika is looking to accomplish there. The only thing I was surprised at is that usually the new general manager's first task isn't firing the head coach, but other than that, I wasn't surprised. How about you?
No, not surprised at all. And I agree. When you're a new manager, a lot of times, you always say you only have a certain amount of bullets. And I would have, before taking the job, say to Keith Pelly, well, you let go of the interim or you let go of the incumbent coach because I don't want that on my resume. Mm-hmm. But I think, it's a scenario where you come in, you take over an organization, you very quickly have to do a forensic audit of what you have. And, apparently they had some conversations. Keep in mind, John Shaika and Matt Sundin working together as a team. So they probably had it in their mind. They want a clean slate. And, John Shaika said as much in his media yesterday, said it wasn't so much about Craig's ability. It's just more about where we want to be as an organization. And I think that's fair. And you want to bring in your own people and put a stamp on your organization right away and not build a team and then maybe have that team coached by the incumbent and maybe make a move at Christmas. I think it's just clean slate and move on. So it was probably a financial situation that you had to run through the board. Keep in mind, I know the Toronto Maple Leafs have lots of money, but at the end of the day, you still have people to answer for on money that's going out the door that you're not going to be having those people give you services. So Craig Berube was owed some money, so it probably had to go up the chain, and you have to figure that out moving forward. So I wasn't surprised by it, but it'll be more interesting to see who John Shaika brings in and how he builds we'll call it his version of the Toronto Maple Leafs.
How do we characterize Craig's tenure with the Leafs? I mean, year one, I think a lot of things went right. Guys stayed healthy, which is a big thing. I think the roster was better. And, you could argue they were the second best team in the league that year. I mean, they went to Game 7 against the eventual Cup champion Florida Panthers. Nobody else took the Panthers to Game 7. And so it was a really good year. Last year, the roster wasn't as good. The kind of bottom fell out. They had, goaltending issues early in the year with Wall not being available. Then Stolarz got hurt, and it was a scramble. The defense was kind of a mess with injuries. Year two goes really just down the tubes. How do we characterize these 2 years with Craig Berube?
I would say overachieve in the first year, and a lot of that might have been masked by their great goaltending. They had a great tandem. Yep. If you look at their underlying numbers, some of them weren't as strong, but they certainly, like you said, you take Florida to 7. It took Florida a little bit to settle into that series before they really revved it up. But, Toronto was a team that was more direct. They played a little bit more of Craig Berube's style in that first season. So I think they overachieved a little bit in that first year and underachieved massively this year. And you're right. You just laid out, the injuries and Joseph Wall's absence, the injury to Tanev, and you look at the defensive core that was older and slower and not as mobile. Injuries to Auston Matthews and key players. Matthew Nyes missed some games. William Nylander missed games, and the roster construction was a lot different. You bring in Michelli, maybe didn't work till the end of the season. Dakota Joshua was a guy that was brought in to be a little heavier, and he gets injured. So to me, it was a combination of injuries, inconsistencies, and just anything that could have gone wrong did go wrong, to the point where a weight fell on Craig Berube's head. And if you want a symbol of the whole season, it was him standing behind the bench with, it looked like 100 stitches in his head. And I felt awful. And I love Craig Berube. I played with him.
Yeah.
But it just seemed like everything that could have gone wrong last year did go wrong for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I know they're looking for health and a rebound this year, but his tenure was strong in season one and not as strong in season two. And a lot of the factors that we just laid out were contributors to that.
Yeah, and listen, this guy won a Stanley Cup in St. Louis. He's had success in his coaching career. And just
Yeah.
because you end up out at one place doesn't mean you're not going to do a good job somewhere else. We've seen that time and time and time again. So the search begins now for a new head coach. And I liked what Chaika said about, it's an organizational approach. I always feel like you have to set the tone. Who are we as an organization? What type of team do we want to be? I always felt like in the 90s, the Red Wings knew they wanted to be a skill team, and so they would always
Yeah.
side on at the draft skill players, even if maybe they were a little smaller, and they got a lot of hits because of that, because it stayed to who they were. So I like that the Leafs are trying to set that tempo. But who do you think they're trying to be moving forward with the team they have right now?
Well, I think that's the one thing. So, I'll come back to EJ. There's still a few questions that need to be answered. And I think that's where John Chaika has to have, if he's got a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, plan D type of thing. Plan A obviously includes Auston Matthews and building the team around him and William Nylander and Matthew Nyes. But at the end of the day, Auston Matthews has 2 years left on his contract. And you pretty much have to find out when you're on day one of the job, maybe the intentions of what that player he thinks of the organization, thinks of the city, and thinks of his long-term vision to stay there. And if there's any inkling of, okay, maybe there's some, trepidation, maybe some hesitation to stay longer term than the 2 years, then it might shift you into a plan B or a plan C situation.
Mhm.
So I think the identity of the team would be shaped around. I think John Chaika is a guy that wants players that have skill, a lot like Kyle Dubas's thought process. You've got
Mhm.
skill. I don't know if size and grit and all of that type of stuff factor into what John Chaika would try to build, but that's his moves will dictate that. And I
Yeah.
think when you look at some of the moves that he's going to make, they might dictate as well if these factoring in John or factoring in Auston Matthews
Yeah.
and William Nylander and John Tavares to be a part of that, or you're going to move past them and kind of retool, rebuild on the fly because you do have that number one pick that potentially could be Gavin McKenna, or if you head in a different direction, that might also dictate, what his organization's going to be.
Jamie, I just wonder if it's realistic for the Leafs to think that they can just retool this roster because there's so many issues on defense. I mean,
Yeah.
it'd be nice to think that Tanev is going to come back and play and be healthy, but like his history is, even if he comes back and starts the season, he may not finish it. I mean, he is
Yeah.
at this stage a fragile player. And listen, he's a terrific player when he's healthy, but he's longer in the tooth and he is very injury prone, as we know. I just wonder if it's realistic to say, hey, we can go out and we can hope guys stay healthy and we can find these players. The free agent market is thin. Good teams retain their players. There is not going to be this tremendous amount of help in the free agent market, from what I can see, to make the team completely turn around. Do you think that maybe the best course is to, I mean, you're going to have to go to Matthews and figure out what he wants, but maybe the best course is decide to move some of those guys and try to get as many assets as you can right now and start over with a new manager with a new approach?
I think that has to be, at least if that's not plan A or plan B, it's plan C. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that as well, EJ, is you have to do a fact-finding mission. And that's probably what John Chaika is doing right now on a daily basis, figuring out who he has in the organization, who he likes, who he could move away from as far as players, as far as people. They had 6 AGMs at one point, I believe.
Yeah.
So you've got to sort out like kind of the pecking order of the org chart. But I look at it, EJ, you're right. The other thing I'll add on is, even if you retooled very quickly in the offseason, started signing Radish and Alex
Yeah.
Tuck, and you start
Yeah.
doing these things, who are you taking out in the Atlantic? Like that's
Yeah.
the you and I were talking off air. This Buffalo and Montreal teams, they're
Yep.
not going anywhere. They're
Nope.
young, they're skilled, and now they're getting a taste of what it's like. They're only going to get better. Detroit is going to need a good offseason, and they're close. Ottawa is a good team with a young core. Um, Florida Panthers with rest could be very
Yeah.
dangerous coming back. And then you throw in Tampa, who's lost 4 years in a row in the first round. They're not happy, but they're a very good team. So even if you can put yourself, and Boston made it back with one
That's
year of
right.
quick retool. So even if you're saying, let's be the Boston Bruins, which is fair, it's, if you can get health and get your players playing to that, who are you taking out? Now you could say maybe there's a team that I just mentioned has a year that the Leafs just had health
Mm.
and bad breaks and all of that, and they drop out. Well, maybe the Florida Panthers, the Detroit Red Wings take that spot. There's no guarantee that the Leafs take that spot. So I think everything has to be on the table. And the one thing that you just said that stands out for me, EJ, is they're not an organization with a wealth of picks and prospects.
Yeah.
So you look at this Montreal team who has Enstrom and Reinbacher and Haig and like
Yeah.
and Fowler sitting on the bench, and like
Yeah.
they've got players in every position that are ready to push out players instead of like add to a team that's thinner. So that's the one thing that when I look at the Toronto Maple Leafs, yeah, they've called up Ben Danford. He's going to play for the Marlies. Like that's probably their top defensive prospect. Easton Cowan is playing for the Marlies, but we already saw him in the NHL. You're
Yeah.
factoring him playing in the NHL. They don't have 3 or 4 guys that are playing like the Montreal Canadiens in Laval that are going to play in the NHL next year. So I think they might have to head down that pathway just to replenish the cupboards, because let's be honest, for the last 10 years, 9 or 10 years, they've gone all in at the deadline and they've had a very good team. It's just unfortunate they've come up short when it's gone to going deep into the playoffs.
With the idea, let's just say that they decide they're going to go in a different direction, and you're going to start to investigate moving Matthews. I mean, what does that trade look like for you? Because it's got to, they have to get significant assets back, and he does have some protections that he could maybe dictate, and that will make it difficult. What do you think they have to get back for Matthews to make it worthwhile? Is it just picks and prospects, or are they hard? I would guess you need some young players that have shown some promise so far.
So if you're using Quinn Hughes's trade as a template, that ended up being 5 or 6 players, like,
Yeah.
with picks and everything. I don't know what it is, because the one thing I would say, EJ, is you got to look at, if you are going to use this as a partnership, and nowadays the players control where they want to play and where they're going to go if they're going to move on. So, if John Chaika decides or Auston Matthews decides, however you arrive
Yes.
at, you're going to
Yeah.
move on, right?
Yeah.
If you're good, however you arrive at, the player's going to move on. You've got to work as a team and say, give me 4 organizations.
Yeah.
Don't just give me one. And that organization knows you want to go there, so they're going to,
Yeah.
give you a little leaner of a haul.
Pennies on the dollar.
Yes, exactly. So to me, it's, if you look at Quinn Hughes and what he was able to garner, are you looking at that type of stuff for Auston Matthews if he decides to move on, or something like that? I remember so I was in Minnesota when that trade went down, because the Ottawa Senators were playing them the next day. So I was
Yeah.
calling the game. So I sat in on Bill Guerin's press conference, and I loved what he said. He said, when the possibility of getting Quinn came up, he said, we knew our offer had to be serious. It wasn't one where Vancouver was going to have to counter and we were going to have to nip and tuck. He said, for us to get a player of that caliber, we were going to have to give up some really good players and prospects. And that's exactly what he did. And if you look at what Vancouver got, maybe in the short term, it didn't seem like much, but I think, some of the players they got in that trade, plus the picks, are going to end up being a king's ransom for Quinn Hughes. And it's going to help, fast start their retool, rebuild, or whatever they're doing in Vancouver, and that organization decides. But I think that's what you have to look at with Auston Matthews if he moves on, is, you can't leave carnage behind. What you are doing is you're moving on from,
Yeah.
we'll call it a legacy player, and you are restarting your rebuild, and you're already going to have the first overall pick, so you can add that into whoever you get from player X, Y, and Z and pick X, Y, and Z for an Auston Matthews or William Nylander, you name it. So I think that's where you have to start. I don't know what organization wants or could take that on. I think there's several that could, but again, it's we could create a deal. Everyone said, "Hey, trade him to San Jose for the second pick."
Yeah.
What if Mike Greer goes, we're not there yet? Or
No thanks.
what if Auston Matthews goes, yeah, I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now that deal's dead and you can't even look at it. So to me, you have to have that partnership with the player as a manager, and the player and the agent have to have that partnership with the organization so that you do what's best for the greater good.
Yeah, yeah, like you're absolutely right. I mean, if you can get everybody on the same page and get a couple of suitors, now you have a chance to make a good deal. Let me get back to the coaching thing because now
Sure.
Berube's out, but like, who do you see as a good fit here? I mean, like, Bruce Cassidy's name is going to be out there for every job. I mean, it's already been
Sure.
out there for the Oilers. They decide to make a move, and they almost had
Yeah,
to
you have
move
to.
on from Chris Knoblauch just because of the way things unfolded there. But like, I look at it and I think of John Scheichen. I think of the situation in Toronto. Bruce Cassidy's going to have options. I don't think that's really probably his number one destination. And I don't know really if it's John Scheichen's number one thought. It seems to me he almost wants, maybe a younger coach and someone that they have a little bit more control of in terms of, how they want to run things. Again, back to that organizational philosophy. Can you think of anybody outside of Cassidy that makes sense for the Leafs?
So Manny Malholtra's names get thrown around a little bit
Mm-hmm.
because Manny's a up and coming progressive coach, very
Yep.
well liked, very well respected. Um, you look at Manny, has been in the Leafs organization, familiar with the city, all of that. But he's, you know, I look at it and I'll give you an example. Ryan Huska's done a really good job in Calgary.
Yeah.
And, Calgary wanted to bottom out or, have a dignified tank, however you want to phrase it.
Yeah.
That team did not cheat you for effort every night. They were
No.
prepared and they worked really hard. And I look at, you've got to find a Dan Muse. You've got to find a Ryan Huska. I'm going to butcher his name. Is it Warchowski?
Warshawski, yeah, in
Warchowski
San
in San
Jose.
Jose. Like, find the next guy
Yeah.
because and you brought up Cassidy, Laviolette. There's some really good coaches out there. Patrick Waugh.
Yeah.
But do you have to find out what's a fit for your organization today,
Yeah.
in year 3, and in year 5? And, you know, to me, I look at some of the veteran coaches, Laviolette, I look at Cassidy. Edmonton is closer to
Yeah.
what they're trying to achieve than Toronto right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that job might be more desirable for a veteran coach who's more hardened and is proven to win. If you're looking at Toronto and saying, okay, what's the philosophy? Do you want to make the playoffs next year? Okay, great. You can get a new coach bump. Maybe that new coach, you've got to figure out who the coach is for the team that you're going to build. That's why I thought maybe there was a delay in firing Craig Berube as to figuring out what the philosophy is for John Chaika. Because if you were
Yeah.
going to hire, I'm just going off the board, if you were going to hire Mark Hunter,
Yeah.
as the new general manager of Toronto, maybe he'd be like-minded with Craig Berube and say, I'm going to build a team that plays this way. You'd be the right coach for it. So you're already being paid by the organization. There's no use in us moving away from you. John Chaika seems to me to be a different type of manager who's going to build a team more like Kyle Dubas. And, if that's the case, then you're going to move away from Craig Berube because he wouldn't be the right coach. You've already had a poor season under him. I feel like there's a lot of people felt like you couldn't bring him back anyways. You probably should have fired him when you had when you relieved Brad Treliving
Yeah.
and let Newsy Lalonde run the team. Derek
Yeah.
Lalonde could have run it for the rest of the
Yeah.
season, and then you start clean slate. So I think it's more about what players you're going to put in to that lineup that will dictate what coach you choose. But that's a name that sticks out for me. A guy like uh, Manny Malhotra
Yeah.
he's never been in the one chair. So maybe it will be a younger guy who gets an opportunity at the NHL level to grow.
Jamie, I'll ask you about, like, you're part of the media in Toronto. I mean, you
Yep.
guys with you and Brian and Jeff. I mean, you
Yep.
guys tangle with all the different topics all the time, so you know how this is. It's an interesting thing that we hear constantly. It's been a story, this week. Marner's playing well in Las Vegas, and
Yep.
the Toronto media, and it makes it hard. Like, to me, I don't know. I think if you took the Avalanche team and you put them in Toronto, they'd be really good. They might even be
Yes.
better. I don't know. But, like, I just think it's 32 teams. It's hard to win. It's hard to build a team. I think two things can be true at the same time. That Marner in big games in Toronto just didn't perform as well. Now, you know what? He didn't have that help on the blue line. Like, he's got Theodore and Hannafin there shooting that puck up the ice.
Yeah.
They have a little bit of a different group there that allows for him to be successful. I don't know if that was necessarily the case in Toronto, but how do you feel about all this talk about the Toronto media makes it so difficult? I mean, everybody's a big boy here. I would think, the idea of winning in Toronto would be overwhelming if you could have success there. I was just in Montreal. I mean, it can't be a cakewalk to play for the Montreal Canadiens. I mean, that media group is pretty tough in two languages. But, what is your thoughts on all the talk about the Toronto media and how it influences how the team plays?
I wouldn't say influence, but what it is EJ, you have to be aware of it. Like, it's in your
Mhm.
face. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing. Like, I remember talking to a former Leaf, and he said, after 5 years, he was like, it was draining. And I said, give me an
Mhm.
example. And he goes, on a Monday, we wouldn't play till Thursday. And he goes, you want to show up, you want to practice, put your work in, do all that. And you just want to go home and you want to go watch a movie or whatever. He said, you always had to be on. And he
Mhm.
said, 50 media members, lots of, it's just busy. It's noisy.
Yeah.
If you're the type of player that can handle the noise, no problem. But I think it's a cop out for people to be like,
Mhm.
oh, it's just that the media is, it's because of the media. No, it's not. The media is loud in Philadelphia. It's loud in New York. It's loud in Chicago. It's loud in Vancouver. It's loud in Edmonton.
Yeah.
It's loud, as you just pointed out, it's loud in Montreal. You know what? It's pro sports and there's social media everywhere. It's loud everywhere nowadays if you want to be in tune with it. Is it a little bit quieter in Carolina where there's maybe 4 or 5 beat members? You can walk out of the rink and you're not as, you're not as recognized. You can go to the grocery store, you can go golfing, all of that. I understand that. But it just comes with the territory. So I played for the Florida Panthers and we weren't very good, and then it was quiet there. But I
Mhm.
enjoyed that life. I played for the Calgary Flames and we were very good. I played for St. Louis Blues and we won the President's Trophy in '99. We got recognized everywhere. And
Yeah.
and St. Louis is a sports city. Like, I think it's one of the best hidden sports cities around. But the point being is, I don't subscribe to that. I just think you have to know going in as a player. Everything, the volume's just turned up a little louder because the attention. So I've told friends that we're going to sign with Toronto or get traded there, and I don't. It might be the wrong formula, but I hear me out on this.
Okay.
I always say 80-20. 80% of the fan base will love you no matter what. They love the Toronto Maple Leafs. They love everything that comes with the Leaf. They've just been born and bred a Leaf fan. 20% will dislike you no matter what because it's just that's sometimes people love to hate the Leafs.
Yeah.
But I said the difference is that 20% is loud. So understand that things, any story, the volume just gets turned up on it just because the amount of eyes, the amount of passionate fans that read those stories, that weigh in on it. You can't go anywhere, including myself, that have you talked about our show. You can't go anywhere in Toronto without somebody stopping you talking about the Leafs. They're a very big topic. So it's noisy. You have to understand that comes with the territory. And I don't hear any player complaining when they're a 105-point team in the regular season and they're getting treated very, very well, and you're getting all these deals outside of hockey and all that. What it is they only complain when it's noisy negative. They're not complaining when it's noisy positive. And that's like any market. The Philadelphia um, 76ers the other day were begging fans not to sell their tickets
Yeah.
to the Knicks fans, right? Like, it happens. So I don't subscribe to that. I guess that's the long answer to. I think you have to understand when you come to Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver or Edmonton or Winnipeg or any Canadian city that the fans are passionate, they're educated, and they are all in on their team. But it's I look at New York, it's just a bigger city. I played for both teams down there. They love the Islanders, they love the Rangers. Can you hide a little bit in a bigger city? Absolutely. But for
Mhm.
the most part, there's still pressure nowadays, EJ. Doesn't matter where you are to perform, to do your job to the best of the capabilities, or else you and I will be talking about it on TSN or the NHL network.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. That is so true. Hey, one more thing on the Marner thing, because I
Yeah,
just find it fascinating. Like nobody ever said Mitch Marner wasn't a really good player. I mean, like
no,
nobody ever said that. I mean, I guess the feeling was you had that core group of guys in Toronto, and that much was expected, and they didn't get to the conference final even really, and they
right.
had a hard time getting out of the first round. And the numbers are the numbers. I mean, like none of those guys really was terrific individually in the playoffs. I would argue again, like, they never had a great defense there, I didn't think,
No,
or a puck moving defense that allowed for them to maybe be a little bit more freewheeling and to attack and have those guys set free a little bit more on the attack in the offensive zone. But all that said, like, there's this idea that Marner was run out of Toronto. Like, I'm pretty sure they wanted to keep him. But at the end of the day, when his contract, now maybe they mismanaged the handling of the timing of trying to
yeah.
get him signed. But it seemed to me that Mitch was pretty determined by the end to leave, and that's just the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah, he chose to leave because he became a free agent. And
Yeah,
in my understanding is they had offered contracts. There were a time where they were offered a trade. He didn't accept it. I think the time to deal with a lot of those stuff, EJ, is when the organization has control, not the
yeah,
player.
yeah,
And I think there was a time frame where he had a no trade that kicked in July 1st, and they looked at maybe trading him, and they didn't. And they
yeah,
chose to stay with the core four. And you just laid it out. This is a team that we're just talking about facts
yeah,
that got out of the first round twice in 9 years. So something has to change. I'll give you the Vegas model, for example. Vegas wins the Stanley Cup. Vegas makes it to the Cup final. They're changing coaches. They're changing players. They're changing, like, you know what they're trying to do? Win every year.
win.
And in Toronto, they probably could have broken that core four up maybe sooner and just
Mhm.
had a different look or just had a different philosophy. And they said, you know what? We're going to be bullish. We're going to stick with it. We're going to do that. Kyle Dubas left. They stuck with it. Brad Treliving came in. And you look at, I don't know if Treliving's hands were tied on trading Marner before that no trade kicked in, but it worked out the way it worked out. And I'll say this about Marner moving on or other players. Marner plugged and played into Vegas. That team is already, the culture's built, the leadership group's there already. He's a hell of a player. He's a
Yep.
great, great player. And he was a great player in Toronto. Like,
Yeah.
like
So
this, it's
true.
he's a great player. There's just no
Yeah.
getting around. He's a great player. But he can go to Vegas and he doesn't have to be the guy.
Yeah.
What he can be is a great player on a team that has great players as well. And they've got Eichel, they've got Stone. You look at Hurdle, you go around Dorofeev, like they've got all these players that
Yeah.
he can plug and play into there and be a great player in a system that's different. And he doesn't have to be the face of it. And in Toronto, that core four became the face of everything. And unfortunately, to some fans, it became the face of losing because they did not get to where they wanted to be. And that's unfortunate. But it wasn't all on Mitch Marner. It was,
Mhm.
as you said, could you have had another puck moving defenseman? Could you have had in a big game, Auston Matthews score? If you look at it in his game sevens, there wasn't a lot of production there.
No.
And so at the end of the day, I think it's lazy for the fan base, and I don't, it's more the fans that are frustrated to just go, oh well, now he can go play, but where was
Mm.
that in Toronto? Well, it's a different team, different
Yeah.
conference, different coach, different everything, and he looks great there in Vegas, and by all accounts, he's settled in and enjoying his life there. but it's not like he only gave 2 years to Toronto and then
Yeah.
said, I'm out of here. He
Yeah.
gave 9 years. He was
Yep.
drafted, developed. He grew up here. He knew the pressures of playing here, and he chose to move on. And it happens. And I think Toronto has to move on from it too, and they should be happy
Mhm.
that a guy's gone on and having success. Vegas is a good team. I don't know if
Yeah.
anybody's going to beat that Colorado team. Like they
Mhm.
just look so good, and so does Carolina. But I think if Vegas can get through, Marner's going to have to be a big part of them going up against Colorado, because they're going to need everything to try and beat that juggernaut.
Yeah, no question about it. They showed us again in Game 5, rallying from a 3-0 deficit to win in overtime, and Nathan MacKinnon kind of off the hook. I guess the only saving grace for people is Cale Makar looks like he's a little dinged up. So we'll
Yeah.
see how that's going to be. Lucky they won, because now they bought him a little rest. So we'll see how he can recover. Last thing, Jamie, about they win the lottery. Like they have
Yeah.
this, they announced Shaika, which was surprising. They have the press conference, which was chaotic. And then 24 hours later, they win the lottery and everybody's happy. Just real quick, are they going to use that pick? Are they going to take McKenna? Like, is that the course of action that you would follow?
I would 100%. I think you
Mhm.
take that pick. And again, you've got more of a scouting background than me, but I've seen McKenna play once live, and I've seen him play a bunch of times on TV.
Mhm.
He looks like the real deal. And
Yeah.
and you you go to Penn State, you had success after the World Juniors, you really started to settle into your game. It looks like he's got a little bite. I don't know, the body type looks a little thin, but
Mhm.
again, you can have a good summer and put on 10 to 15 pounds of beef and be ready to play. Um, I don't know what John Chaika, what he values or his scouting staff values right away, but I think it's the philosophy: you go with the best player available and what you believe. So I think I would not trade that pick whatsoever. I think you build around that pick and continue to add. And it comes back to what we talked about at the start of the conversation: is Auston Matthews part of the equation, or is he not?
Yeah.
And that could fast track a rebuild if he's not. And if he is part of the equation, there's your mentor. There's your guy that can show the ropes and play with, and maybe if it's McKenna, steps right in and is a contributor. And what I would say, that if anybody's learned anything from this past season, and there's two things that stand out for me. One, Celebrini at the Olympics, not overwhelmed as a
Yeah.
19-year-old.
Yeah.
Number two, Matthew Schaefer is an 18-year-old, and what he did with the New York Islanders. Now, they didn't make the playoffs, but Schaefer showed, and these young kids are showing, they're not intimidated by
Mhm.
being in a veteran league. They're not intimidated by these moments. If anything, I had an AGM say to me the other day, these teams, these young teams, and these young players are like AI. They're learning, they're learning as they get like games.
Yeah.
And I laughed because he said it to me. It was about Anaheim beating Edmonton. He said, you watch them get better through the series instead of wilting and getting pushed
Yeah.
out by a veteran team. And it's so true. These kids now are not overwhelmed by the situation. So if Auston Matthews is staying, maybe you could factor in that McKenna could be an instant impact player, as opposed to, hey, we're going to wait him into the league or send him back, or that type of stuff. It's just these young kids are, I guess the moral of my story is they're not surprising me anymore. Where
Yeah.
I've been pleasantly surprised in the last, we'll call it 18 months, of these young players just stepping in and being impact players.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, I guess, Jamie, at the end of the day, I think Auston Matthews, that situation is job one. We'll
Yeah.
learn more about the Chaika philosophy moving forward. We don't really know exactly what it is, but his actions will dictate that and tell us. And the good news is you guys up there, you and Hazy and O-Dog, will have a lot to talk about over the next several weeks and months. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat today. Really, really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. And yes, as you know, there's never a shortage of things to talk about in the Toronto sports market,
No.
especially when it comes to the Leafs. And they've given us lots of content here for the next couple months for sure.
No question about it. Jamie McLennan from Overdrive. And this has been the Toronto Sports Rush right here on the Bet Rivers Network. Remember to like, subscribe. We got a lot of great content for you. EJ Hradek signing off for now. Have a great day, everybody.